Thank you for joining us for another exciting episode of Taking Stock, Talking All Things Retail. Today's topic is artificial intelligence in retail, present and future use cases. Our guest speakers today are Rohit Nagpal, Chief Customer Officer at Absolutdata. Rohit has a breadth of expertise spanning 18 years. He's worked in a variety of industries, including travel, hospitality, finance, and software technology, and has managed relationships with CIOs and CTOs of billion-dollar corporations and medium-sized organizations. And Arvind Gupta, President at Jesta I.S. Arvind leads the innovative growth of Jesta Vision Suite Cloud platform. Under his leadership, Jesta has been ranked as a top 10 software vendor, and in 2021, he was recognized as one of the top 10 most promising technology leaders by Industry Era magazine. With that, I'll pass it over to Arvind to lead his conversation with Rohit, artificial intelligence in retail, present and future use cases. Arvind?
Great. Thank you, Norbert, for your kind introduction. Very good morning to you, Rohit. And artificial intelligence, especially in last 16 months, as we have been navigating the pandemic, we hear so many different variants of artificial intelligence. And quite frankly, it has been since the advent of Apple Siri devices, Amazon Alexa, there are so many variants of artificial intelligence. So Rohit, what is your definition of artificial intelligence?
Well, Arvind, first of all, good morning. Thank you, everyone, to the Jesta I.S opportunity to bring me for this exciting discussion. You're absolutely right. Artificial intelligence, is the buzzword around the economy, is the buzzword around the retail space, and everyone seems to have a different definition of what artificial intelligence is. I'm not a techie guy by any stretch, but let me explain what I think is artificial intelligence, right? In my mind, in simplicity, artificial intelligence, consider it as a branch of computer science that makes computer behave like humans, right? Just like, humans, artificial intelligence has the ability to characterize things. And the 3 or 4 main characters are sense, which is like, audio processing, looking at the computer vision of the videos. Comprehend is like, you use the natural language processing to analyze things, and then you act on it, right? In terms of giving a recommendation or putting, your machine learning into play. Or in simplicity, consider artificial intelligence like a doctor. When you go to a doctor, he's able to sense, what's happening with you. He's able to comprehend what needs to be done, and then he's able to act by giving you a cure or a medicine to fix this out. So for me, artificial intelligence is, characteristics or a combination of sense, comprehend, and, act to put, to make computers or machines act like humans.
That's great. That's very, let's call it a very layman's language, if I may just want to paraphrase what I heard. It's interesting that artificial intelligence is essentially tapping into the power of computing resources that we know we are used to, but making them behave a little bit more like humans, where humans, we are brain wired, pun not intended, to adapt to situations and react differently. So your point about ability to sense, making computers ability to sense, and then ultimately based on sensing, going through a repository of information and understand what it means comprehend, and then ultimately, most importantly, I think, Rohit, what you are saying is that to be able to act based on all the information and respond or provide answers, or provide, in case of, as you painted an example about doctor, provide thoughtful analysis or diagnosis based on all of that. That's very, very, very interesting. Thank you for that. Now, in terms of the space that we are trying to navigate, we know one of the biggest hit by pandemic was clearly the retail space, where in America alone, it employs more than 50% of total workers, employable workers in the United States. And just when the pandemic hit, boom, overnight, when all the physical stores were shut down, those people became jobless. So clearly, retail is probably one of the areas where, perhaps based on what you described, your understanding of artificial intelligence has huge possibilities. So what's your understanding or your thinking or thoughts are about artificial intelligence, in particular in the retail industry, Rohit?
Sure, Arvind. So I think, again, you kind of, rightly framed it, right? The retail industry was, anyhow going through a reinvention with the whole digital transformation that's happening, right? The brick and mortar businesses were, up against the e-com thing that was eating their wallet share, giving them sleepless nights, and then came the pandemic, right? So, it was like a perfect storm hitting it all together, right? And that was the time when the retailers needed to really, take a step back and figure it out how they're going to reinvent themselves in the post-COVID world or address the needs within the COVID world itself and build from there. So from my perspective, in the easy definition that I gave you, it is basically using the characteristics of sense, comprehend, and act to reinvent, the retail landscape. What I mean by that is you look at, how do you want to address your customers? What do you know about your customers from a segmentation perspective? How do you want to reach out to those customers from a promotion perspective? And then use things like machine learning to build real-time solutions from a back-end perspective so that you have, what the customer wants available to them and package it together. So this is how, I think, retail is, driving artificial intelligence. You're seeing a lot of use cases right now on the front stack of it in terms of customer facing sales and marketing, but, you will continue to see a lot of things in the back end from a, manufacturing, inventory management, forecasting perspective, supply chain that drives the retail industry, using more and more of artificial intelligence.
Makes sense. So in the context of retail industry where clearly you kind of hinted that, customer understanding the customer and based on understanding customers, segmenting them by their importance to your brand, to your business, or their preferences, and then most importantly, offering them very, very inspired experience by either reaching out to them in a very, very intelligent manner so that they stay inspired and stay loyal to your brand. It clearly makes tons of sense. But question is, for an average retailer, Rohit, what would make sense to get them to start trying to incorporate for a business artificial intelligence if you're a retailer or retail brand, Rohit?
Sure. I think that's the multi-million-dollar question. Where do you start? How do you start? And, how do you go from there, right? There are, if you just Google artificial intelligence in retail, you'll get tons of, trends. You'll get tons of, companies having their solutions and technologies in play. So there are many approaches and technologies that you can use to apply, how do you want to get started? And it also depends upon what's the end vision of a particular retailer in terms of how do they want to package it, who do they want to address first, and who do they want to compete, and how do they want to create a space for themselves in this space. Right? We at Absolutdata, work with a lot of retailers, in the industry, and our approach has been that leave the technology aside, leave the solutions aside. We apply the concept of digital twin to get started in the retail industry, and that is a concept that we feel clearly quantifies how do you put this whole thing together and the decision and the outcome that can be measured quickly. So our approach with retailers who are going to go down this path is the concept of digital twin, and that's where we bring in our expertise and point of view on.
Very, very interesting, very thought-provoking idea that creating a digital alter ego, digital twin, and digital twin, I'm just thinking out loud, perhaps is everything you kind of hinted on early on, where it is building a digital profile based on sensing, comprehending, and potentially acting guidance, all coming from data that is collected within the retail enterprises. So can you double click a little bit more into digital twin and notion of digital twin and tell us more about that, please?
Sure, absolutely. I think before I, give my easy definition of digital twin as well, a little bit of history on digital twin and where it originated, right? Arvind, you probably would recall, and I'm sure a lot of other people, right? Have you seen this movie, the Apollo 13, right? When, we were launching the space shuttle, right? And, when it was up there, the NASA team, had to fix certain things, and, they had to make some mission critical decisions. And, they ended up simulating the whole shuttle in their setup and played around with a lot of combinations to see what would be the right fix or the solution that needed to be addressed. So that is where, in my mind, the digital twin concept originated, right? So it's exciting and interesting, right? And then move that forward, the whole manufacturing world has been using digital twin to kind of, take it to the next level, right? Having a digital twin of the machine that is doing a lot of manufacturing for you, and how do you take advantage of that is, something very, very exciting. So we at Absolutdata used the same concept and kind of said, okay, how do we take digital twin to the retail industry? And that is where it originated from an Absolutdata thought leadership perspective. So, there was a concept that was very heavy in the non-retail industry, but we see a very clear approach in terms of how it can be applied in the retail industry, right? So again, now for definition, I would say digital twin, as you rightly said, is a virtual or a digital representation of a physical product. It can be a store, it can be a particular product, or it can be a particular business process. It can be a consumer. It can be a consumer like you, me, and combine that with the information flow to make sure that it's completely synced. And the information flow is nothing but all the data sources which an enterprise captures and kinds of leverages to do analytics, which is prescriptive, predictive, all the way to recommendation. So again, the characteristics of a digital twin, in my mind, would be it's a very living, dynamic model, right? It is constantly updated. It's always learned, and it quickly adapts to the changing needs, right, or changing data. The data frequency or the data flow changes if the flow of how data is going to capture, and that has a consequence on the outcome. It adjusts to that, and that's the beauty of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the digital twin, because you can use that information real time to play with simulations and make business critical decisions. So that is digital twin in a nutshell. And again, I'm going to go back as an example. In Absolutdata, we provide a lot of thought leadership services around digital twin in terms of having data science people who come in and have adopted that in the retail industry. We've also built in a product or a platform, which is an AI enterprise platform called Navic. And Navic has a lot of modules and components which address the digital twin need for retail industry.
Wow, that's mind is exploding, and kind of connected back to the Apollo 13. I'll be sure to watch another rerun for the 10th time on my stream, one of the streaming channels, and be sure the event that you described, those could have been, quite frankly, and even in business, could be very catastrophic if there's no plan or no real contingency plan in place. And your point about digital twin in terms of where and how it gets created and how it could ultimately become very prescriptive, real life situation is well made. So, but if I'm a retailer, Rohit, and I want to actually, let's say, adopt or start navigating adoption and construction and ultimately leveraging of digital twin ideology, how do I go about starting that? What does it mean? And can you speak to maybe a couple of really tangible benefits that may come out of that?
Sure, absolutely. I think the way to look at digital twin is you bring in all the data sources together, right? Your structured data, your unstructured data, your outside data, and start building a holistic view of a digital twin. And what I mean is, a lot of companies, whether it's enterprise or retailers or outside, you can get the directly observable information like the age, the gender, and the basic characteristics of a thing. Then you're always looking for the passive information, which is the social media data, right? And then the behavioral footprint, right? What did Arvind buy in the last 6 months, and what did Rohit buy in the last 6 months? That pattern and that stream of data is available for us. And then the big retailers and the medium-sized retailers and all kinds of retailers always do customer service. They're using third parties, or they're reaching out to their customers in terms of what they would anticipate. So there's a data source from surveys, right? And then there is implied information, right? Probabilistic characteristics, right? Based on what Arvind bought in the last 6 months, what is he going to buy next? Is all those characteristics of data are available with an enterprise. So you bring it all together and start creating a digital twin of an Arvind or a Rohit, or a community like Arvind, people who have characteristics similar to Arvind, and say, okay, this is where I have a market of a particular digital twin. For this set of digital twin, this is what I'm going to simulate and see how they react to it and how do I go from there. So that's the concept of how do you start building a digital twin, and then we go from there, right? And again, from my perspective, the examples would be, if I build, say, example, Arvind, I'm taking liberty to take your name. If I make a digital twin of Arvind, right, and I'm able to put all these data sources together, I would have information in terms of what's the source of media that Arvind likes, what is his preference to converse on a particular, deal, whether it is through, chat or whether it is through other sources, what's the category, what's his, likelihood to go to a store versus e-commerce, what's the type of people he consumes to. And I can use that to kind of really change the dynamics of the future in terms of how I want to sell. So those are some of the huge benefits that retailers can use to make it very personalized for their consumers, very personalized for a store level, or very personalized at the backend level.
And that's fantastic. And you kind of hit a central point here that, typically average Joe retailer or businesses, they are continuously looking at how customers have responded to their product or their services. And based on that, they're trying to do what you're kind of calling is using probability assessment, and to see how much more product or service they might buy, and try to ultimately go in a more, what I call is legacy manner, straight line manner. But what the point you're bringing up is that may not be enough. And the digital twin, in a nutshell, it incorporates not only the information that you gain by direct interaction with the customer, but also from the customers or customer segments, holistic profile, holistic engagement with the overall digitization, whether it is social media or whether it is the browsing history or whatever other sources of new data might be. So packaging it all together and then making a really, really, really holistic digital profile, so that then businesses potentially can use that profile more holistically to engage and inspire their customers. Did I get that right, Rohit, in terms of how you think digital twin is ultimately could be entry point for retailers to start navigating in?
Absolutely right. So I think the biggest use case which I see it getting adopted in the retail world is how do you know your customer and apply the data that you have to better understand and go back to them with things that they really want to see from that retailer. So that's understanding the customers and using that information to create personalized solutions and offerings for them is one of the biggest use cases which is in motion right now, and it will continue to become better and better, right? And I think to segue into the topic for our discussion, right? Other example which I feel really, really strong about is I've been talking about Arvind as a digital twin, but we can always also look at a digital twin of a store, right? I know Jesta product is a preferred solution in the shoe industry. A lot of the shoe retailers use Jesta's end-to-end ERP product, which is cutting edge and provides a comprehensive view. Now, think about it. A shoe retailer can use that to have a digital twin of a store, and they can look at the patterns in terms of how our customers looking at the various shoe types, which one is working, which shelves they need to replicate and upload, and accordingly in the back end, automate the whole inventory management, shelf replenishment purposes, things of that nature, right? So, whether it's at store, whether it is a customer, the concept of digital twin can be applied end to end. So.
No, that's great. And then you kind of hit another very important point there, that automation, retailers who were, no matter where they were absolutely overnight got hammered when the pandemic hit. And then the implications were tremendous. And they have no choice but to become more and more efficient and shift the focus from just handing out, pulling a product, handing out to customer and checking them out in a typical store environment, to be more automation and more focus on customer engagement. So in that context, automation is clearly going to be one of the biggest, I think, from what you're saying there, Rohit, enabler of artificial intelligence, in particular in retail, which could definitely use that. Now, in terms of looking far into future, how do you see the artificial intelligence? Do you see it's going to ultimately become democratized, where everybody, the way we have seen, for example, the web became democratized after 2000, and then cloud became democratized after 2015, and more so now that it becomes a second nature. People to not even question what the cloud is. They just think it is there and you can access it. So how do you see the trajectory of artificial intelligence in retail, like looking far into the future before we close this conversation outright?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's an important thing to look at, right? I think one thing, Arvind, that is very clear is every enterprise, every retailer is moving to a digital platform, and a digital platform that is just not cloud and specific solution, but it is human centered. And the definition is very customer centric digital platform that personalizes and takes care of the experience, right? So from our perspective, the way we look at it, and I'm sure Arvind, you guys also do the same as you're building cutting edge solutions for your retailers. In our world, the digital platform has three key components, right? The first layer is the experience layer, which is all about, the experience from a design perspective, experience from a connect and a interaction perspective with the consumer, which is all about your UI, UX. And a lot of retailers are focusing on that. Your middle layer is your engineering in terms of your, the software and the tools. And the third layer is the cloud, which has now become very, very common across, right? Everything is moving to cloud. All these platforms are building on cloud. So in all those three layers, what is the differentiator for the retailer is going to be AI. AI and data is going to stitch it all together and make it meaningful, very specific for what you're trying to do, and build and combine the whole thing together. So data, artificial intelligence is going to be that secret recipe that's going to bring the experience into the engineering, into the cloud, and put the whole thing together. That's how we look at it. It's going to continue to get adopted more and more. You'll see more use cases, in the front end, in the back end, and all over. And that has just gotten started. So that is our vision. That is what we see, and that is how we feel that notion will move forward.
Great, thank you so much. Very, very interesting, thought-provoking ideas. Data being the currency of the future, and artificial intelligence being the language through which this currency of future could be nurtured as a custodian. The responsibility that all businesses have. That's fantastic. Looking forward to our next chat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Taking Stock, Talking All Things Retail. Today's topic was artificial intelligence in retail, present and future use cases. Our guest speakers were Arvind Gupta and Rohit Nagpal. We look forward to you joining our next episode of Taking Stock, Talking All Things Retail. Have a great day.